Caroline Marks.
I'm Carolyn Smith.
I'm Lindsay Callahan, and we're doing a performance of
Four Dead in Ohio.
Kent State Massacre forces Nixon to reform policies in Vietnam.
5, 4, 3, 2.
Good morning, students. Today's lesson will be about the Kent State Massacre, almost 42 years ago, on May 4th, 1970. This revolution was originally because the students were protesting against the Vietnam War. But we're going to start a few days earlier, on April 30th, 1970.
President Nixon?
Why, hello!
What are you doing in my classroom?
Well, I'm here to talk to you about the events leading up to Kent State.
Oh, like how you referred to the protesters as bums?
Well, initially, I didn't think that anyone who heard my comments at the Pentagon or who heard the tape recording of them had any doubt that when I talked about the bums burning up the books and blowing up the campuses, I was referring to the arsonists at Kent State, Berkeley, Yale, and bombers like them. The Washington Post headline the next morning accurately reflected my meaning. Nixon denounces campus bums who burn books, set off bombs. However, the front page headline of the New York Times conveyed a slightly different meaning. Nixon puts bums label on some college radicals. Within a few days, it was a widespread impression I had referred to all student protesters as bums.
So I can imagine this must have angered the protesters.
Of course, the National Student Association called for my impeachment, and editors from 11 Eastern colleges, including most Ivy League schools, ran a common editorial in their campus newspapers calling for a nationwide academic strike.
Wow.
I know, but no one at the time was prepared for what was to come.
So, what initially started the protests?
Well, when I gained the presidency, I created a program of Vietnamization, where I steadily removed the number of U.S. ground troops in South Vietnam, while still training the South Vietnamese to defend their own.
So I can imagine this must have angered the protesters because more people were going to be dying in the war?
Well, what angered them really was that I had escalated the U.S. airways over North Vietnam, bombing their supply and infiltration routes. But when this action failed, I decided to invade Cambodia.
So I can imagine this is why you were accused of bringing the war home.
Well, yes, because when the protests turned bad, I was the one blamed for them. But by invading Cambodia, I planned to use Cambodia as a bargaining tool to end the Vietnam War. But I knew there would be both military and political risks, and since I took those risks, I do assume full responsibility for them. I can say it was one of the worst events of my presidency.
What's happening?
My name is Leon Smith, and I was part of the National Guard called to the Kent State campus on May 2nd, 1970, when two students threw lit flares into the Army ROTC building and burned it to the ground. At first, things were going fine. Then the students started acting crazy, so we shot into the crowd.
Wait, why would you shoot at the protesters?
Well, as I said, things were going fine. Then the students started being rowdy and throwing rocks out of softballs at us. They gave the orders to throw tear gas, but the students threw cannons right back at us, so we shot into the crowd.
But they didn't even do anything. They didn't even have any weapons.
Hey, it's not our fault.
But 9 students died. 9 students were seriously injured, and 4 students died.
Well, we didn't actually mean to hurt anybody, but it was their fault for not following orders telling them to leave the campus. After those events, 8 guardsmen, including myself, were put on trial for what had happened.
When?
This was 4 years later, in May of 1974. At first, we couldn't believe it. It wasn't our fault at all. It was Governor Rhodes, the university administrators, and our commanding officers for placing us in those vulnerable positions in the first place.
But was it really? Because there wasn't any massive rush of students towards you, and all of the students that were shot were located at 60 to 600 feet away. And 2 of the 13 people shot were shot in the front.
Well, some people believe that to be true. And our defense attorneys, C.D. Lambros, Bernard Stoklinski, and Ed Wright, were actually able to poke holes in the prosecution. And get this, one of the witnesses for the prosecution was John Cleary. He was one of the injured protesters at the riots. On trial, he admitted that when he gave his original statements in 1970, he had been under intensive medications. It was so funny to see him panicking under pressure when he realized his statements were therefore invalid.
Wow, that must have been embarrassing for the prosecution.
You got that one right, kid. And Later that day, the judge told the prosecution to have an argument ready, because if we asked for a direct acquittal, then he would grant it.
You guys were acquitted, but you were guilty. You shot.
Hey! I'll say it once and I'll say it again. It was not our fault.
But
no, we were put in those vulnerable positions, which is why the next day we were acquitted.
I can't believe this. Why were they acquitted?
I know, because many people, also just like you are, thought that a conspiracy had occurred. For the prosecutor Murphy did not use all the information that was available to him. For in the FBI report, in which he helped to write, it was reported that 6 guardsmen, including 2 sergeants and a captain, had stated that their lives were not in danger, and it was not a shooting situation. But yet Murphy didn't call any of them to the witness stand.
So, what was your reaction?
Well, on May 4th, I had received the information that the students were killed from my chief of staff, Hiddleman. Of course, I was stunned. Once I received their names, I wrote personal letters to each of the families, even though I knew words couldn't help.
But I still don't understand. Why were they acquitted?
Well, it had to do with the disadvantages that Murphy faced. For he was only able to interrogate James McGee, one of the 8 guardsmen on trial, because the others had pled the 5th. Also, the defense attorneys each got to give their defense separately, which meant they had 3 times more time to give their defense than Murphy did to give his prosecution.
That's really unfair.
I know. One of the students shot, James Russell, was later reported saying, "I found out that day that the legal system is not the justice system."
I agree.
Yes, but I had to carry out my plan with the invasion of Cambodia.
And was it successful?
It was. And when it became apparent, there were various parades organized in my support. One man even said to me, "Mr. President, if someone would have had the courage to go into Cambodia sooner, they may have captured the bullet that took my son's life."
Wow. Sounds like people are starting to think of you as a hero rather than what they said about you before.
I know. In the beginning of January of 1973, I had reached a peace agreement with Vietnam. We, the U.S., would withdraw all of our troops, while Laos and Cambodia would have no more military activity, and all the prisoners of war would be released, as well as the 17th parallel would remain dividing Vietnam. At midnight, January 27, 1973, all the troops were removed.
The reaction to the revolution was huge. Famous singers and songwriters composed songs specific to the events at Kent State, including Ohio, with Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Carolyn, are you sleeping in my class?
What? No.
Well then, can you tell me what happened as a result of the protests?
Sure. The reaction to the revolution forced Nixon to change his policies in Vietnam, and in January of 1973, all the troops had finally been removed.
Wow. That's exactly right. Everyone in the United States was so happy to be out of the longest war we'd ever experienced.
But the lives of the 4 lost students from May 4th, 1970 will never be forgotten.